Ethan stepped off the starship onto the surface of Zephyria, his boots crunching on the strange, metallic-tinted soil. The sky glimmered with two suns, casting long shadows over the alien city sprawled below. He paused for a moment, breathing in the faintly electric scent of the air. Around him, the Zephyrians moved with elegance, their limbs long and flexible, their skin shimmering faintly in soft shades of silver and green. He adjusted the strap of his satchel and looked at Lyra, his wife, who was already moving gracefully through the crowd. Her eyes sparkled, but there was a tension around her shoulders that Ethan could feel even from a distance. He knew why. Ethan had been called a gentle human more times than he could count. Diplomats, officials, even Lyra's own family had used the term with a mix of amusement and pity. To them, humans were weak, soft, predictable, but Ethan had learned long ago that there was strength in patience and power in understanding. Sometimes, the quiet ones were the most dangerous. The council hall was a vast structure of translucent crystal, spiraling upwards like a giant tower of light. Its walls hummed faintly, resonating with the vibrations of the city itself. As Ethan entered, heads turned. Murmurs rippled through the room. A human among the Zephyrians was rare, and one in the council hall accompanying Lyra drew attention immediately. Lyra's father, High Chancellor Varin, rose from his seat. His eyes narrowed slightly at Ethan, and a subtle tilt of his head suggested that he doubted the human's ability to handle what lay ahead. Ethan bowed politely, his expression calm. "Ethan," Varin said, his voice smooth, yet carrying a subtle edge. "You are welcome, though I trust you understand the importance of restraint in our halls." The first session of the council began with routine matters, trade negotiations, mining permits, and adjustments to the city's protective shields. Ethan listened carefully, noting the subtle tensions in the room, the tiny glances exchanged between factions. He understood strategy, not just with machines or tools, but with people. Humans had survived for millennia by observing, calculating, and choosing the exact moment to act. During a break, a group of young Zephyrians approached him. They had been watching him since he arrived, whispering to one another. "You are fragile," one of them said, curiosity mixed with disbelief. His skin shimmered more brightly than most, signaling excitement or anxiety. It was hard to tell which. Ethan smiled faintly, not in mockery, but in a way that suggested he understood their surprise. "Fragile?" he asked, tilting his head. "Why do you say that?" "Sometimes peace is the strongest weapon." His words were calm, but the tone carried weight beyond the sound itself. The Zephyrians blinked, momentarily unsettled. None of them had expected the human to respond like that. Lyra returned, her hand brushing Ethan's arm. "Ignore them," she whispered softly. "They mean no harm. They just don't understand humans." To the outsiders, he seemed calm, almost passive. But inside, his mind worked like a finely tuned machine, processing every detail, every potential threat, every opportunity. By late afternoon, a tense moment arrived. An influential official, Lord Corrin, stepped forward with a sharp edge in his voice. "And this human, your husband, is to accompany you in our halls," he said, loud enough for several delegates to hear. "How reassuring!" The last word dripped with thinly veiled mockery. The room fell silent. Eyes turned toward Ethan. Even Lyra tensed, unsure how he would react. Ethan met Corrin's gaze evenly. He did not flinch, and his calmness seemed almost like a challenge. "I am here to learn and to support my wife," he said, voice steady. "If I am required to do more, I will." The council ended, and the city's protective gates opened to allow them outside. Ethan and Lyra walked through the streets, observing markets and workshops where Zephyrians displayed their technological marvels. Everywhere they went, whispers followed them. The human husband, so gentle, so quiet, how could he possibly matter in their world? That evening they returned to their quarters in a sleek building that overlooked the shimmering city. Ethan unpacked quietly, arranging his few possessions with care. Lyra watched him, a mixture of admiration and concern in her eyes. "You were calm today," she said softly, breaking the silence. "But I could feel it. Every time Corrin looked at you, there was something in you." He moved silently to the window and observed a small group of cloaked figures moving through the streets below, carrying devices that emitted faint pulses of light. Their movements were careful, precise. They were tampering with some of the city's machinery. He frowned. "Sabotage," he whispered to himself. Humans were often underestimated because they did not look for conflict, but Ethan's experience told him that weakness invited attack. Lyra stirred beside him. "Do you know them?" The Zephyrians might see humans as gentle, but Ethan had learned long ago that survival depended on action, not appearance. He observed the group carefully. They were skilled, but predictable in ways only someone with human intuition could see. One leaned too close to a control panel, and Ethan seized the opportunity. Using a simple device from his satchel, he sent a pulse that disrupted the saboteurs' instruments. Sparks flew and the group froze in confusion. Ethan did not attack. He simply waited, silent and calculated, watching their panic grow. They had underestimated him, assumed gentleness meant weakness. That mistake would cost them. By the time the city's security arrived, the saboteurs had fled, leaving behind their disrupted tools. Security marveled at how the human had managed to neutralize the threat without anyone being harmed. Whispers spread quickly through the city. This was not the gentle human they had mocked. They had glimpsed something else entirely. Lyra found him later, calm but alert. "You could have been seen," she said, a mixture of relief and exasperation in her voice. "I needed them to see only what I wanted them to," Ethan said. "Gentleness can be a mask. Strength does not always need to shout." "That is why humans survive, Lyra. We are underestimated, and being underestimated is the greatest advantage one can have." Outside, the twin suns dipped lower, casting long shadows over the city. Ethan stood at the window once more, observing the bustling streets below. Tomorrow would bring more challenges. The Zephyrians had many assumptions about humans, and Ethan intended to show them just how wrong they could be. He turned to Lyra and whispered almost to himself, "They think I am gentle. Soon they will learn what that truly means." Merchants displayed devices that floated on magnetic fields, tools that bent light, and fabrics that shimmered like liquid metal. Yet Ethan's eyes were not on the spectacle. He was observing. Every glance, every gesture, every slight movement of the Zephyrians around him fed into a map forming in his mind. Humans had a history of noticing patterns, reading intentions, and understanding the unspoken. The aliens thought he was quiet and harmless, but silence often concealed calculation. "Do you always watch people like this?" Lyra asked, stepping close to him as they moved past a display of levitating tools. "Not always," Ethan replied. "But when you are in a place that sees you as weak, it pays to notice everything." Ethan moved without hesitation. A group of saboteurs, the same ones from the night before, had returned, more determined. Their devices pulsed with strange energy, disrupting the city's machinery and sending tiny fires flaring along the streets. The Zephyrians around them panicked. They had power, weapons, and advanced technology, but they lacked the human unpredictability that Ethan could exploit. He stepped forward calmly, assessing the situation. Lyra grabbed his arm. "They're armed," she hissed, worry lining her face. "I see that," he said softly. His eyes scanned the saboteurs' movements, noting their patterns, the timing of their pulses, and the way they coordinated. "But they expect us to panic. That is their mistake." The saboteurs continued their disruption, unaware that one small human device could undo much of their work. Ethan watched carefully, waiting for the exact moment to act. Humans had survived by patience and timing, and he intended to prove why. A young Zephyrian merchant, frozen with fear, dropped a floating cart of metallic tools. Sparks erupted, but Ethan stepped forward, placing a steady hand over the cart and guiding it safely away from the flames. The crowd murmured, noting his calm presence. To the aliens, this was unusual. Most humans would have fled. The saboteurs noticed him. One yelled, pointing directly at Ethan, expecting him to panic. But Ethan's expression remained calm, almost serene. Then, with a subtle press of a button on his device, a pulse radiated outward. Sparks danced across the saboteurs' tools, causing their coordinated attacks to falter. Confusion spread across their faces. Lyra gasped, "You did that." Humans were often underestimated because they remained calm in chaos, and that calm was a weapon more powerful than any gun. The saboteurs regrouped, trying to restart their devices, but Ethan had already anticipated this. Using simple gestures, he directed the fleeing crowd to safety while keeping the saboteurs distracted. When they advanced toward him, he used their momentum against them. He shifted pieces of the environment, metal crates, floating platforms, and pulsing lights, creating barriers that slowed their approach. The aliens around him were stunned. They had expected the human to be gentle, weak, and ineffective. Instead, he was turning chaos into control without raising his voice, without striking with force, yet dominating the situation completely. By the time the city's security forces arrived, the saboteurs were disoriented and trapped between barriers Ethan had created. The humans stepped aside, letting the Zephyrian guards move in. The attackers were quickly subdued, their plans thwarted without a single casualty among the civilians. One of the guards, a tall Zephyrian with silver-green skin, turned to Ethan. "How did you do that?" he asked, genuinely bewildered. Ethan shrugged, as if the answer were simple. "I watched, I waited, they expected panic, I gave them calm." He scanned the crowd, noting the whispers, the widened eyes, the disbelief. Underestimating humans has always been a mistake, one they rarely recover from. "Do you intend to make a habit of interfering in matters you barely understand?" "No," Ethan agreed, "and they will learn whether they like it or not." Humans were quiet, gentle, and seemingly harmless, but the smallest action, the most subtle observation, could shift an entire situation in their favor. One afternoon, they were invited to a private audience with a group of influential Zephyrian traders. Ethan noticed immediately that their interest was less about trade and more about testing him. They asked pointed questions about his human abilities, his knowledge, and even his reaction to conflict. "Your species is simple," one trader said, leaning forward. "Yet you survive in places that many of our kind could not. How?" Humans had a way of seeing opportunity where others saw only rules. The Zephyrians had technology, power, and advanced intellect, but humans had something they did not anticipate: unpredictability paired with patience and timing. Later that evening, Ethan walked with Lyra along a quiet path overlooking the city. The twin suns were setting, painting the sky with fiery oranges and deep purples. "You're different here," Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "In our world, humans are stories, but you're real, and everyone can see it now. And until they learn, they are at a disadvantage." Reports of further sabotage reached the council, and Corin's presence became more aggressive. He watched Ethan from a distance, clearly trying to provoke a reaction. But Ethan remained calm, moving through each situation with the same quiet confidence. When Corin attempted to corner him in a negotiation, Ethan used logic, observation, and subtle pressure to expose flaws in Corin's strategy. The room shifted. Allies of Corin began questioning him quietly. The Zephyrians were not used to seeing their leaders challenged so effectively, especially by a human. Lyra watched, her pride swelling. Her husband was proving something not just to the Zephyrians, but to everyone who thought humans were simple, weak, or predictable. By the end of the week, the whispers were no longer about Ethan's gentleness. They were about his cunning, his patience, and the quiet power behind his calm demeanor. He had turned the tables without raising a hand, without violence, showing that humans were more than what appearances suggested. And in a small, private moment, Ethan turned to Lyra and said, "Tomorrow they will test me again. And again they will be surprised." Outside, the city sparkled in the fading sunlight, unaware that a single human, quiet, patient, and underestimated, was changing the balance of power with nothing more than his mind, his patience, and his unwavering presence. The city of Zephyria buzzed with activity under the twin suns, but beneath its polished surface, tension simmered. Rumors of sabotage and the strange human who had thwarted it spread through every street and plaza. People whispered about Ethan, not as gentle, not as harmless, but as something else entirely. Something unpredictable. Ethan himself felt the shift. He had moved carefully for weeks, testing, observing, and neutralizing threats before they could escalate. But patience had limits. Every minor attack, every underestimation, every glance of scorn from the council or Corin built a quiet pressure inside him. Humans could be gentle, yes, but they could also unleash a force that was as precise as it was unstoppable when provoked. The breaking point came during a council session meant to discuss a minor trade dispute. Corin, clearly frustrated by Ethan's quiet influence, leaned forward and slammed his elongated hands on the crystalline table. "This human," he said, voice sharp enough to echo through the hall, "continues to interfere in matters he cannot possibly understand. Does your wife truly expect us to tolerate this insolence?" "I do not interfere without reason," he said quietly, "but when lives are at risk, I act." The saboteurs had returned, bolder than ever, targeting Lyra's family estates and key infrastructure. Panic spread quickly. Zephyrians ran in confusion, but Ethan remained still as if the chaos were a puzzle to solve rather than a threat. Lyra's hand found his arm. "Ethan, this time it's worse. They've brought weapons," she whispered, fear lacing her voice. "I see that," he replied calmly. "But fear is exactly what they expect. We will use it against them." Ethan's mind worked quickly. He calculated trajectories, studied the patterns of attack, and noted every flaw in their coordination. The saboteurs expected brute force or panic from a human. They did not expect strategy, precision, and control. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a compact human device, one he had modified with simple materials available on Zephyria. It could emit targeted electromagnetic pulses, short bursts strong enough to disable alien technology without harming civilians. He set it carefully on a ledge, adjusted the settings, and pressed the activation switch. Immediately, several of the saboteurs' weapons malfunctioned. Sparks erupted, and confusion rippled through their ranks. Aliens trained in combat stumbled, unsure how to react. Ethan didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout commands. He simply moved methodically, turning their momentum and overconfidence against them. The first wave of attackers surged toward Lyra's estate. Ethan anticipated their path, stepping onto a narrow bridge that shimmered with energy. He used his weight to shift panels subtly, causing the attackers to misstep and stumble. Their own weapons, designed for precision, misfired against the shifting environment. From a distance, the council watched in astonishment. This was no gentle human defending his wife. This was someone who understood physics, psychology, and strategy all at once. A wave of whispers spread. "He is unstoppable." Ethan sidestepped, letting the alien stumble past him, then used a small device to send a pulse that knocked the attacker's weapon offline. Lyra watched from a balcony above, her breath caught in her chest. She had married a man she thought gentle, yet here he was, precise and unstoppable. Every movement he made was calculated, every action deliberate. Humans were underestimated because they could conceal strength beneath calm, and Ethan was proving that fact beyond doubt. The saboteurs regrouped, attempting to coordinate another attack. Ethan observed, noting the smallest details, the angle of their approach, the timing between each move, the hesitation caused by their own confusion. He acted again, this time using a combination of his human devices and the environment. Magnetic barriers shifted, energy pulses disrupted weapons, and the attackers found themselves trapped in a carefully constructed maze of their own making. The council members whispered among themselves. Corin's face darkened as he realized that Ethan's wrath was not chaotic, but precise, measured, and devastating. Unlike the Zephyrians, who often relied on overwhelming power, Ethan used intelligence and timing to multiply his impact. One of the saboteurs attempted to flee toward the energy pylons at the edge of the city. Ethan anticipated this instantly. He adjusted the pulse device, sending a localized surge that disabled the pylon's outer shielding, forcing the attacker to retreat. Another tried to climb a floating platform to escape, but Ethan had subtly destabilized its magnetic field, sending the alien tumbling into the street below. Lyra could not look away. She had never imagined a human capable of this level of precision and control. Her husband was not gentle. He was a storm hidden in calm waters, and the Zephyrians had only just glimpsed the fury beneath. Ethan's mind remained clear. His goal was not destruction for its own sake, but to stop the saboteurs and protect the innocent. Every move was calculated, every action deliberate. By the time Zephyrian security arrived, the attackers were incapacitated or trapped, unable to continue their assault. The council convened later to assess the damage. Corin, pale with frustration, avoided Ethan's gaze. Other council members whispered among themselves, their expressions a mixture of fear and admiration. The human had done what their best security teams could not, neutralize a coordinated, dangerous attack without causing harm to civilians or property. Lyra approached Ethan quietly. "They saw your wrath today," she said softly, "and yet you controlled it perfectly. It is most effective when directed. Humans survive because we know when to act and how to control what others assume is chaos." Merchants and officials spoke quietly of the strange, precise way he had neutralized the attackers. Zephyrians had expected a gentle human, a soft presence, someone easily dismissed. Instead, they had witnessed intelligence, patience, and controlled wrath combined into a force that could not be ignored. Corin, meanwhile, retreated to his chambers, muttering to himself. How can one human be this? Calm, precise, unstoppable. He had underestimated Ethan from the start, assuming gentleness equaled weakness. Now he realized how deadly a human could be when provoked and calculated. The following days saw increased scrutiny from the council. Officials who had once mocked Ethan approached him cautiously, seeking his insight on security, sabotage prevention, and strategy. Each time he answered with calm intelligence, never showing anger, yet every word carried the subtle weight of human unpredictability. Lyra observed these interactions, noticing the shift in attitudes. Her husband's patience and precision were slowly changing the perception of humans on Zephyria. They were no longer curiosities or gentle companions. They were beings capable of reasoned wrath, of controlled power that could overcome even the most technologically advanced species. One evening, as the twin suns set and cast the city in deep orange and purple, Ethan and Lyra stood on a balcony overlooking the plaza. The city below sparkled with lights, the energy flowing smoothly once again. "They will test you again," Lyra said, her voice quiet. "Some will never understand humans. Each mistake they make is an opportunity for them to learn, and for me to act if necessary. Humans have survived by understanding what others overlook. That will not change here." The gentle human they underestimated was never gentle at all. Humans thrived when underestimated, and the Zephyrians were learning this lesson firsthand. The calm human they had mocked had become a storm they could neither predict nor ignore. And so the city slept, unaware that the gentle husband was a controlled force of human wrath, precise, intelligent, and unstoppable when provoked. The days that followed the attacks were tense. Zephyria was a city of precision and order, yet the recent events had shaken its confidence. Rumors of the human husband who had quietly but effectively neutralized the saboteurs spread through every corner of the city. Traders whispered in markets, officials exchanged uneasy glances in council chambers, and children told stories in hushed, excited tones. Ethan and Lyra moved carefully through the city, aware that attention followed them everywhere. The council had not punished Corin, but his subtle glances and muttered warnings made it clear that he had no intention of leaving the human unchallenged. "They will try again," Lyra said softly as they walked through a quiet street lined with crystalline trees. "Some will want to humiliate you, others to test your limits." One of Corin's allies, a minor official named Telvar, had been orchestrating quiet acts of sabotage. Nothing overt, just enough to destabilize confidence in the council and frighten civilians. Ethan observed the subtle patterns. Small machinery malfunctions, supply delays, whispered threats in public halls. The human's skill of noticing patterns that others missed gave him a clear view of the network. Lyra watched as Ethan mapped the situation silently in his mind. He was calm, but there was a sharp focus in his eyes. "How do you know what to do?" she asked quietly. "You watch, you wait, and you find the moment when action changes everything," he replied. "Wrath, when controlled, is far more effective than anger alone." This city, with all its advanced technology, could be manipulated in ways the Zephyrians never considered. He began quietly undermining Telvar's influence. Orders went unnoticed, shipments were redirected, and minor mechanical errors were subtly introduced, always in ways that could be explained as coincidence. The Zephyrians noticed, but no one could trace the disruptions to a single human. Lyra watched him, impressed by the calm effectiveness of his actions. "They'll never see it coming," she said, a hint of awe in her voice. Ethan smiled faintly. "They never do. That is why humans endure. They act where others hesitate, and we do so quietly, carefully, deliberately." Small incidents multiplied, creating tension among officials and traders. Corin became increasingly desperate, attempting to control the chaos he could not explain. Every move he made was anticipated by Ethan, who used subtle timing and observation to stay one step ahead. Then came the moment Ethan had been waiting for, a public council event where Corin and his allies were present, and the city's elite would be watching. The council had gathered to discuss the recent disturbances and to propose solutions, but Ethan knew the true purpose was to humiliate him. Corin stepped forward during the session, his tone sharp. "We must address the instability caused by these unusual events. Perhaps our gentle human can provide insight into how these incidents occur," he said, a thinly veiled challenge in his voice. The council murmured, some with curiosity, others with thinly disguised amusement. Ethan stood calmly. "The incidents are not random," he said, his voice even. "They follow a pattern. Those responsible act quietly, but not without mistakes. Understanding these mistakes is key to resolving the situation. Observing and acting at the right time is what makes us effective." Using careful planning, he set a series of traps that would expose them without danger. When the devices activated, small errors in their machinery and communications were traced directly back to them, creating a chain reaction of accountability. The Zephyrians were stunned. A human had engineered a system where the perpetrators of chaos revealed themselves without a single confrontation. Corin's network began to unravel not through force but through observation, patience, and human ingenuity. Lyra watched Ethan at work, feeling a mix of admiration and relief. "This is more than protection," she said softly. "You're correcting them, teaching them." Humans endure because we understand timing, psychology, and subtle influence. This is how we turn underestimation into advantage. The once smug, arrogant official was now forced to defend himself against accusations he could not anticipate. Every move he made played into Ethan's strategy, every reaction anticipated and countered. The council convened to address the exposed sabotage. Corin struggled to maintain control, while other officials, previously skeptical, now looked to Ethan for guidance. The human had turned their perception of him upside down, not with brute force but with intelligence, observation, and precise action. Later, in private, Lyra approached Ethan. "You've changed everything," she said. "Not with fighting, not with violence, but with strategy. You've proven something important to them all. Humans are underestimated because they are quiet, because we do not always show our full capabilities. That is why we endure. They learn the hard way that patience and intelligence are formidable weapons." Traders and citizens whispered about the human husband who had quietly corrected the chaos, exposing traitors and stabilizing the city. The Zephyrians were learning that appearances were deceptive. A gentle exterior could conceal a mind capable of turning any situation to its advantage. Corin, meanwhile, seethed. He had expected anger or panic from Ethan, but what he had encountered was far more dangerous: precise, controlled action. The human's wrath, tempered with intelligence and patience, had undone everything he had tried to build. Ethan continued to move carefully through the city, never flaunting his abilities, but allowing subtle influence to shape events. Each action, each observation, each carefully timed intervention reminded the Zephyrians that humans were not as simple as they assumed. One evening, Lyra and Ethan walked along a quiet path overlooking the city's central plaza. The twin suns were setting, casting a soft, golden glow over the crystalline buildings. "They are starting to see it," Lyra said. "The humans are not gentle. They are something else. You are teaching them a lesson about what humans can do." Citizens moved cautiously, aware of the recent events, while council members whispered about the human husband who had quietly reshaped the balance of power. Ethan stood on the balcony of their quarters, observing the city below. His calm presence had already begun to shift perceptions. Humans were no longer curiosities to be ignored. They were beings capable of strategy, intelligence, and controlled wrath. Lyra stood beside him, hand in his. "The city will never see humans the same way again," she said. "No," Ethan replied quietly. "And that is exactly as it should be. They learn through observation, and their assumptions are their weakness. That is why humans survive. That is why humans endure. Tomorrow they will continue to test me, but each mistake they make teaches them a lesson, and humans never forget. And the Zephyrians are learning it, whether they want to or not." And when the next challenge arrived, he would be ready, not with anger but with intelligence, precision, and controlled wrath that left no room for misjudgment. The city slept, unaware that its balance had already shifted, and that the human husband they once dismissed as gentle was quietly changing everything around him. The city of Zephyria was quiet that morning, but the calm was deceptive. Ethan and Lyra walked through the central plaza, their presence commanding attention without a word. Word of the human husband's intelligence and precise actions had spread throughout the city. Whispers followed them in the streets, in the marketplace, and through the corridors of the council hall. Citizens and officials alike were beginning to understand something they had once refused to see. Humans were not merely gentle. Humans were unpredictable, capable, and when necessary, unstoppable. Ethan had not sought recognition. His goal had always been protection and preparation, the subtle shaping of events to ensure safety and stability. But recognition had come anyway, carried on the astonished whispers of a population that had underestimated him for far too long. Lyra walked beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "Do you feel it?" she asked softly. "The city has changed. Everyone knows you are not what they expected. Understanding comes slowly, but they will remember it." His posture was stiff, his normally sharp expression clouded with uncertainty. He had tried to predict Ethan's actions, but every move the human had made was precise, controlled, and perfectly timed. Every attempt at intimidation had been met not with anger, but with intelligent, calculated responses that left Corin scrambling to maintain authority. The council session began with discussion of the recent incidents. Officials presented reports of disrupted energy lines, mismanaged shipments, and sabotage that had inexplicably unraveled. Murmurs filled the chamber, some in awe of the human husband's work, others in disbelief that one being could have such an impact without brute force. Ethan listened quietly, as he always did, analyzing the information and mapping the situation in his mind. Humans survived because they understood patterns, psychology, and timing. They acted when others hesitated, they exploited the errors that others overlooked, and they maintained patience even when provoked. That knowledge allowed them to turn weakness into strength and underestimation into advantage. When Corin attempted to speak, he found his authority undermined. Each point he made had already been anticipated by Ethan, and the subtle manipulations of council procedures exposed the flaws in Corin's logic. Other members of the council exchanged glances, some nodding toward Ethan, recognizing the clarity and effectiveness of his interventions. "You are exceptional," one official said quietly, leaning toward another. "This human, he is unlike any we have seen." Humans did not need recognition. Their influence was measured by results, not words. The session moved to solutions. Ethan quietly suggested minor adjustments to the city's monitoring systems and defensive protocols. They were simple changes, yet they multiplied efficiency and security without causing alarm or disruption. Each suggestion demonstrated human ingenuity, a combination of observation, logic, and adaptability that Zephyrians had rarely considered. Lyra watched him from her seat, pride evident in her expression. "You've done more than protect us," she whispered to herself. "You've shown them what humans can do." The citizens were waiting, murmuring among themselves. Some were curious, others wary, but all had been touched by the recent events. Children peeked from behind market stalls, merchants whispered about the precision and calm of the human husband, and officials who had once dismissed him now regarded him with careful respect. Ethan walked slowly through the crowd, acknowledging nods and soft greetings. He did not boast or demonstrate power. His calm presence was enough to command attention. Humans were often underestimated because they did not need to display strength overtly. True strength was quiet, precise, and measured. A group of traders approached him cautiously. We have never seen a human handle such complexity," one said. "Without aggression, without chaos, your actions were flawless." They had assumed gentleness equaled weakness, but Ethan's presence had demonstrated otherwise. Meanwhile, Corin retreated to his chambers, his frustration growing. He had attempted to assert control, to humiliate the human husband, and to regain influence over the council, yet every move had been anticipated, every plan countered without confrontation. He realized, with a mixture of fear and respect, that humans were not only capable of action but capable of reshaping perceptions and outcomes without a single show of violence. Ethan returned to Lyra's side. "They are learning," he said quietly. "Slowly, but inevitably. Underestimation is their mistake, and humans endure because they overlook what we can do. Patience is the greatest advantage of all, and humans know how to use all three when it matters most." Humans were no longer curiosities or minor figures in Zephyrian society. They were beings whose intelligence and patience demanded recognition and respect. Lyra's family began to treat Ethan differently. Where once they had assumed he was soft and incapable, they now approached him with caution and deference. Even Corin's allies, previously smug and dismissive, had begun to acknowledge his capabilities, if only quietly. The lesson was clear: never underestimate humans, for their strength was often hidden beneath calm and quiet observation. One evening, Ethan and Lyra stood atop a tower overlooking the city. The twin moons cast a silver glow across crystalline streets, highlighting the vibrant life below. "They will remember," Lyra said softly. "Every whisper, every lesson, every action you took, they will not forget it. Patience, observation, and calculated action, these are our strengths, and now they know it." Citizens moved with renewed respect. Officials approached decisions with caution, and the once dismissive Corin had learned to watch humans carefully, aware that their quiet presence could reshape events faster than any force he could deploy. Lyra placed her hand on Ethan's arm. "You've changed more than the city," she said. "You've changed their understanding of us." Gentle on the surface, precise in action, and strategic in every decision, Humans had proven once again that what others dismissed as weakness was often the greatest strength of all. By the time the night was at its deepest, the city rested. Officials, citizens, and even rivals had learned lessons that would not be forgotten. The human husband, who had once been assumed gentle and harmless, had shown that patience, observation, and controlled action could change perceptions, neutralize threats, and command respect without the need for force. Lyra leaned against him, whispering, "You've done more than protect me or your family. You've shown them the true nature of humans. Humans endure because we are underestimated. And when that underestimation meets patience, intelligence, and controlled action, we shape the world around us without fighting battles others expect." A quiet human husband, gentle in appearance but unstoppable in intellect and strategy, had rewritten what it meant to underestimate humanity. And as he stood there with Lyra, watching the city below, Ethan allowed himself a rare moment of quiet satisfaction. Humans had survived for millennia not by brute force alone, but through observation, patience, intelligence, and the careful control of wrath. Zephyria had learned this lesson, and it would not be forgotten. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, and new moments where humans would be underestimated. But Ethan was ready, always ready. Because humans endure, and when they are misunderstood, their potential is limitless. He looked at Lyra and whispered softly, "They thought I was gentle. Now they know better, and that knowledge will shape every decision they make from now on. I will never forget what you have done, for me, for your people, for all of them." And in doing so, he ensured that underestimation was no longer an advantage. It was a lesson learned the hard way. The twin moons reflected on the crystalline buildings, illuminating a city that had been forever changed. And in that quiet light, Ethan's presence remained a subtle but unshakable reminder: never underestimate a human.